Economic growth is a relatively new paradigm for humanity, and ever since we stumbled upon it, we have collectively been obsessed with it. The economy is almost always the top issue on voters' minds when they decide who they will vote for in elections. The rapid change from decade to decade brought on by economic growth has been a new source of storytelling for movies like Back to the Future, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, and Forrest Gump. There's a whole new genre of stories that offer foreboding warnings about the collapse of economic growth, like Mad Max, Interstellar, and The Day After Tomorrow. We want this economic growth to continue, but ever since it started, people have been worried that it will come at some terrible price down the road. In order to see the power of economic growth, we need an equation for it. If you want to figure out what the end result of growth will be, you can use this growth formula. Our income at the end of the time period will be equal to our income at the start multiplied by the quantity 1 plus r raised to the power of t, where r is the rate of growth and t is the time period. Let's learn by looking at an example. In 1850, average income worldwide was around $1,500. From 1850 to 2020, a period of 170 years, the economy grew by an average of 1.5% each year. With this information, we can figure out what average income worldwide should be in 2020. We just need to plug in our values into the equation. Y start, or our initial income, is $1,500. The rate of growth is 1.5%. Remember, 1.5% is in percentage form, but for an equation, we need to put it in decimal form, which is 0.015. You just move that decimal place over to the left twice to go from percentage form to decimal form. And lastly, our time period is 170 years. So we put in 170 for t. I can simplify what is in the parentheses here. 1 plus 0.015 is 1.015. Then we can use a calculator to raise 1.015 to the power of 170, which is 12.56687. When doing these calculations on your own, I recommend doing it all at once in a calculator, so you don't have to round anything. With economic growth, even small differences in how many decimal places you include can make big differences in the result. In this case, when we multiply the result by 1,500, we get our average income for 2020, which is $18,850. This is a little bit higher than reality, but it gets close enough to see how this formula can be used to calculate the result of economic growth. Let's use our formula and the trends of the past to make some predictions about our future. Most of the time we have used GDP per capita, which is a country's average income. But to get an even better sense of what it will be like for a typical person, we can use the median income. So in the United States in 2020, half of the population earned $44,225 or more. Let's see how economic growth will impact that number. If we stick with our 1.5% growth rate, then 100 years later, in 2120, the median income will be $196,007. I want to emphasize that none of this change would be due to inflation. This is a real, genuine increase in living standards. In 100 years, at 1.5% growth, people will be 4 times richer than the typical person in the US today. Give it another 100 years, and in 2220, the median income will be $868,713, And again, that is measured in today's dollars. Imagine what it would be like to have a salary that high these days. And that is what it will be like for a majority of people in 200 years. 300 years later, in 2320, the median person will be a multi-millionaire with an income equivalent to $3,850,175 of income today. In 2420, the median income is over $17 million per year. Again, this is how rich a majority of people will be. It may sound bizarre and it can be difficult to imagine, but think about how hard it would be to describe what life is like for the typical person today to someone living in 1620. They would be saying, "What thou sayest is impossible. Not everyone can live like the king." Yet indeed, we do. The thing is, we are probably underestimating the growth a rich country like the United States will see. That 1.5% growth rate was the global average since 1850, and most of the globe was not growing. Only the industrialized countries were. In the US, since around 1950, the average growth rate has been more like 3%. Let's look and see what doubling the growth rate does to our forecasts. Does it double the results? No, it does a lot more than that. In 2120, after 100 years of 3% growth, median income will be around $850,000 per year. This would put you in the top 0.3% of income earners today, but in a century, half of all workers will make that or more. In 2220, with 200 years of growth, median income will be over $16 million. Fewer than 15,000 people in the US today make that much money, but hundreds of millions of people will make that much in 200 years. And after 300 years, the numbers just get bonkers. Imagine earning over $300 million every year. Yachts to sail the ocean on, homes on every continent, lots of leisure time. That'll be the norm. Of course, the goods and services people will be using in 2320 will probably be very different than the goods and services we have now, but it won't be totally foreign. About 60% of what we consume today was available 100 years ago. But let's look at 2420. After 400 years of modest, achievable economic growth, the median income will be over $6 billion. This will mean the median income earner, your regular middle-class folks, will be living better than the very wealthiest people alive today. As the Nobel Prize winner Robert Lucas said, once you start thinking about economic growth, it's hard to think about anything else. What we are saying here is that after several hundred thousands of years on this planet, Homo sapiens are a few short centuries away from solving the economic problem and living lives where our every material need and want is satisfied. Most people find this sort of thing hard to believe. As the activist Greta Thunberg told a conference on climate change, "We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth." Is the promise of economic growth too good to be true, as Greta suggests? Are we inviting disaster on ourselves? Or is it like the economist Tyler Cowen says, that our top moral priorities should be preserving and improving humanity's long-term future? Cowen believes the way to do that is by maximizing the rate of sustainable economic growth. Tyler Cowen is worried about climate change and is concerned about humanity doing things that threaten our very existence. But he believes that the best way to handle the problem is by becoming richer. That growth in GDP will overwhelm any other change we might worry about. When you see the numbers like we have, would you mind so much that if even a full half of your $6 billion in income had to go to keeping life on Earth sustainable? Maybe not. In this chapter, we are going to be futurists and wonder about the fate of our economy. Will our civilization collapse? Will the growth stall? Or can it really be that we will grow forever? What will the next few hundred years bring?